Sarah Mitchell was 7 years old the first time she felt the sky call to her. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon in March, in the small town of Whitewood, Montana, population 3,847, where everyone knew everyone, and dreams were expected to stay as modest as the houses lining Main Street. Sarah had been walking home from school, her backpack heavy with books and her mind wandering, when she heard it. A sound that started as a distant rumble and grew into a roar that shook the ground beneath her worn sneakers. She looked up just in time to see them. Two F-16 fighter jets streaked across the impossibly blue Montana sky, their sleek silver bodies gleaming in the afternoon sun like metallic eagles. They moved with a grace that seemed to defy physics, cutting through the air at speeds her young mind couldn't comprehend. White contrails bloomed behind them, twin ribbons of vapor that lingered long after the jets had disappeared beyond the horizon. The sound hit her chest like a physical force, vibrating through her ribcage and settling somewhere deep in her bones. In that moment, frozen on the cracked sidewalk of Cherry Street, Sarah Mitchell made a decision that would change her life forever. She didn't just want to see those jets, she wanted to fly them. "Sarah, dinner!" Her mother's voice called from their small yellow house at the end of the block, breaking the spell. But something had shifted inside her, something permanent. Her father, Robert Mitchell, owned Mitchell's Hardware on Main Street, a cramped store that smelled of sawdust, motor oil, and the dreams of weekend warriors who fixed their own plumbing. He was a quiet man with calloused hands and kind eyes, who believed in hard work, honest living, and not reaching above your station in life. Her mother, Ellen, taught 3rd grade at Whitewood Elementary, where she spent her days shaping young minds while secretly worrying that her own daughter's mind wandered too far, too fast. They loved Sarah fiercely, but they didn't understand her. While other girls her age begged for Barbie dolls and easy-bake ovens, Sarah asked for model airplanes. While her classmates played hopscotch and jump rope during recess, she sat beneath the oak tree with library books about aerodynamics, thrust-to-weight ratios, and the history of aviation. Her teacher, Mrs. Henderson, would find her sketching aircraft designs in the margins of her math homework, perfect, detailed drawings of jets with annotations about wing configurations and engine placements. "She's different," Mrs. Henderson told Ellen during parent-teacher conferences, the word different hanging in the air like an accusation. "Maybe you should encourage more traditional interests." Ellen tried. God knows she tried. She bought Sarah a dollhouse for Christmas. It sat untouched in the corner of her room while Sarah spent her allowance on balsa wood and glue, constructing aircraft models with steady, patient hands. She enrolled Sarah in ballet classes. Sarah quit after 2 weeks, complaining that the movements were aerodynamically inefficient, and she'd rather spend the time studying flight patterns. Her father understood a bit better, though he tried to hide it. He'd find her on the flat roof of their garage at midnight, lying on her back with a flashlight and a star chart, plotting constellations and imaginary flight paths. Instead of scolding her, he'd climb up and sit beside her in comfortable silence, handing her a thermos of hot chocolate. "You know those jets you love so much," he said one night when she was 9, "the ones that fly over from the Air Force Base." "F-16 Fighting Falcons," Sarah said immediately, not taking her eyes off the stars. "Top speed, Mach 2, service ceiling 50,000 feet, armed with an M61 Vulcan cannon and—" "Sarah," he interrupted gently, "sweetheart, those pilots, they train for years, it's dangerous, it's expensive, and—" he paused, choosing his words carefully, "there aren't many women who do that." "There aren't many yet," Sarah corrected, finally turning to look at him. Even in the darkness, he could see the fire in her eyes, the same stubborn determination he'd seen in his own mother, a woman who'd worked in a munitions factory during World War II when everyone said women couldn't handle such work. Robert Mitchell sighed, recognizing a battle he'd already lost. "Your grandmother would have liked you," he said softly. That grandmother, Rose Mitchell, had passed away when Sarah was 4, but her presence lingered in the family like a protective spirit. Rose had been a riveter at the Boeing plant during the war, one of the original Rossi the Riveters, who'd built B-17 bombers while the men fought overseas. She'd been fierce, unapologetic, and utterly convinced that women could do anything men could do, often better. Sarah had only fragmented memories of her. Strong hands that smelled like lavender, a laugh that filled rooms, and a voice that brooked no nonsense. But Ellen kept Rose's old work photos in an album, and Sarah would spend hours studying them, her grandmother in coveralls and a bandana, wielding a rivet gun, surrounded by the skeleton of a bomber, her smile bright and defiant. On Sarah's 10th birthday, her father gave her a gift that made her mother gasp in dismay. Rose's old work gloves, carefully preserved, and a framed photograph of Rose standing in front of a completed B-17, hand resting on its fuselage like a proud parent. "She told me something once," Robert said as Sarah held the gloves reverently. "She said, 'Don't let anyone clip your wings before you've learned to fly.' I think she'd want you to have these." Sarah pressed the gloves to her chest, and in that moment she made a promise. Not to her parents, not to her teachers, not to the town of Whitewood that thought she should be realistic. She made a promise to herself, and to the grandmother she barely remembered but deeply understood. One day, she wouldn't just watch those jets tear across the Montana sky. She would be inside one, her hands on the controls, her heart racing at 30,000 feet, proving that dreams don't have ceilings. They have horizons, and horizons are meant to be chased. The guidance counselor at school would tell her to be realistic about her future. Her classmates would laugh when she said she wanted to be a fighter pilot. The world would tell her, no, 1,000 different ways. But Sarah Mitchell had already decided she wasn't listening to the world anymore. She was listening to the sky. The letter arrived on a gray November morning when Sarah was 17. United States Air Force Academy, nomination approved. Report for basic cadet training, June 28th. Her hands shook as she held the envelope, the official seal embossed in blue and gold. 8 years of perfect grades, countless hours of physical training, summers spent at Civil Air Patrol, nights studying pilot manuals until her eyes burned. All of it had led to this single piece of paper that weighed nothing and everything simultaneously. Her mother cried at the kitchen table. Not tears of joy, tears of fear, of losing her only daughter to a world she couldn't protect her from. "You don't have to do this," Ellen whispered, gripping Sarah's hand. "You could go to Montana State, become an engineer or a teacher or—" "Mom," Sarah's voice was gentle but firm, "I've been preparing for this my entire life. I'm going." Her father said nothing. He simply pulled her into a crushing hug, and she felt his tears wet against her hair. When he finally released her, he pressed something into her palm. Her grandmother Rose's old dog tags from the war, worn smooth with age. "Bring them back," he said hoarsely. "Bring yourself back." The United States Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs was a fortress of glass, steel, and impossible expectations. Sarah stepped off the bus with 47 other basic cadets on a scorching June morning, and immediately a training officer, a junior with a jaw like granite and eyes that had seen too much, got in her face. "Basic Cadet MITCHELL," he roared, his breath hot against her forehead. "Do you think you're special?" "No, sir." "Do you think the Air Force needs pretty little girls playing soldier?" Something dangerous flickered in Sarah's eyes. "No, sir, but the Air Force needs pilots, sir, and I'm going to be one of the best you've ever seen, sir." The training officer's eyes narrowed. For a moment, Sarah thought she'd crossed a line. Then the corner of his mouth twitched, barely perceptible, but there. "We'll see about that, Mitchell. Drop and give me 50. Sarah hit the ground and started counting. Basic Cadet Training, BEAST, as it was known, was 6 weeks designed to break the weak and forge the strong. Sarah quickly learned that being a woman in a male-dominated institution meant living under a microscope. Every mistake was magnified. Every success was dismissed as luck or lowered standards. During the obstacle course on day 3, she fell from the rope climb, landing hard on her back. The wind knocked from her lungs. Male cadets jogged past, some snickering. "Maybe you should try out for cheerleading instead," one called back. Sarah lay there for 5 seconds, tasting blood in her mouth from where she'd bitten her tongue. Then she stood up, grabbed the rope, and climbed it 3 times in a row, once for herself, once for every woman who'd been told she wasn't strong enough, and once for her grandmother Rose, who'd built bombers with her bare hands. Her roommate, Cadet Jennifer Park from California, found her that night in their cramped dorm room, hands wrapped in bloody bandages, doing pull-ups on the door frame. "Sarah, you're going to hurt yourself." "I'm getting stronger," Sarah corrected, not stopping. "There's a difference." Jennifer watched her for a moment, then quietly joined her, positioning herself for pull-ups on the opposite side of the door frame. They did 40 more together in silence. The academic year brought different challenges. Physics, engineering, military history, 16 credit hours per semester while maintaining peak physical fitness and military training. Sarah slept 4 hours a night, survived on coffee and determination, and learned to study while marching, while eating, while doing anything that left her hands and mind free. But it was in the flight simulators where she truly came alive. The first time Sarah sat in the cockpit of an F-16 simulator, everything else fell away. The world narrowed to instruments, controls, and the sensation of the stick in her hand. Her instructor, Major Patricia Vasquez, one of only 12 female fighter pilots in the entire Air Force, watched from behind as Sarah ran through pre-flight checks with practiced precision. "Where'd you learn that?" Major Vasquez asked, genuinely surprised. "Books, ma'am, videos. I've been memorizing procedures since I was 12. "Knowledge is good, Mitchell, but flying is something else entirely. Let's see what you've got." Sarah took off and immediately overcorrected, sending the simulated aircraft into a near stall. Alarms blared. She recovered, but her hands were shaking. "Again," Major Vasquez said. Sarah crashed 7 times that first day. 7 humiliating, ego-crushing failures, while male cadets breezed through with natural talent and swagger. She went back to her room that night and allowed herself exactly 5 minutes to cry. Then she dried her eyes, pulled up online flight tutorials, and studied until dawn. Winter arrived, brutal and unforgiving. Survival training took them into the Colorado mountains during a blizzard. Teams of 4 cadets, dropped in the wilderness with minimal supplies, expected to navigate back to base over 3 days. Sarah's team included 3 men who made their resentment clear from the start. "Try not to slow us down," said Cadet Marcus Webb, a linebacker-sized kid from Texas who'd made it his personal mission to prove women didn't belong at the academy. On the second night, temperatures plummeted to -20. One teammate developed hypothermia. Webb wanted to leave him. "We move faster without dead weight," Webb argued, his words crystallizing in the frozen air. Sarah stepped between him and their shivering teammate. "We're not leaving anyone behind. That's not what officers do." "You going to stop me, Mitchell? You weigh, what, 120 soaking wet?" Sarah's voice dropped to ice. "Try me." They stared at each other for 10 seconds. Then Webb backed down, cursing under his breath. Sarah spent that night keeping their hypothermic teammate alive, sharing her body heat, forcing him to stay conscious, while Webb and the others slept. By morning, her lips were blue and she couldn't feel her fingers, but their teammate was stable. When they finally reached base, 16 hours late but with all 4 team members, the survival training officer pulled Sarah aside. "Cadet Mitchell, that was either the bravest or stupidest thing I've seen this year." "Which one, sir?" "I'm still deciding." He paused. "But for what it's worth, that's what leadership looks like. Don't lose that." The final flight evaluation arrived in May of her sophomore year, a comprehensive test that determined whether cadets would continue in the pilot track or be reassigned. 30% failed. Sarah hadn't slept in 48 hours, had 3 exams that week, and her hands wouldn't stop trembling as she climbed into the cockpit of a T-41 trainer. Major Vasquez sat in the instructor's seat, clipboard ready, face unreadable. "Whenever you're ready, cadet." Sarah closed her eyes. She thought of her father's hardware store, her mother's worried face, her grandmother's rivet gun, and those F-16s that had torn across a Montana sky when she was 7 years old. She opened her eyes. Her hands stopped shaking. She flew. Not perfectly. She clipped one maneuver, hesitated on another. But she flew with heart, with skill, with everything she'd learned and bled for over 2 years of hell. When they landed, Major Vasquez sat in silence for a full minute, marking her clipboard. "Finally, Cadet Mitchell, you just earned your wings." Sarah's vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. "Thank you, ma'am." "Don't thank me, you did this. Now comes the hard part, staying in the sky." Sarah smiled, thinking of a promise made on a rooftop in Montana, under stars that had watched her dream impossible things. "I'm not coming down, ma'am. Not ever." Sarah Mitchell, age 29, sat in the briefing room at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada, her flight suit still damp with sweat from a training sortie. She'd been flying F-16s operationally for 4 years now, had logged over 2,000 flight hours, survived 2 combat deployments to hostile territories, and earned 3 distinguished flying crosses for valor under fire. She was, by every measurable standard, one of the best fighter pilots in the United States Air Force. Which is why the manila envelope waiting in her locker that afternoon seemed almost surreal. NATO Advanced Tactical Exchange Program, 6-month rotation, French Air Force Base 118 Mont-de-Marsan, primary aircraft, Dassault Rafale. Sarah read the letter 3 times, her heart hammering against her ribs. The Rafale, the French multi-role fighter that made seasoned pilots weep with envy, a machine so advanced, so beautifully engineered, that flying it was considered the pinnacle of a fighter pilot's career. Delta wings, canard configuration, capable of Mach 1.8, armed with weapon systems that read like science fiction. Only a handful of American pilots had ever been selected for Rafale training. None of them had been women. Her squadron commander, Lieutenant Colonel James "Hawk" Hawkins, found her 20 minutes later, still holding the letter, staring at nothing. "You gonna accept it, Mitchell?" His gruff voice startled her back to reality. "Sir, I don't understand. Why me?" Hawk settled into the chair across from her, his weathered face creasing into something between a smile and a grimace. "You really don't know, do you? Mitchell, last month you outflew 3 enemy fighters in contested airspace with a damaged hydraulic system and got your wingman home safely. Before that, you pulled off a precision strike in conditions that grounded half our squadron. The French specifically requested you by name. They want to see what an American female combat pilot can do." "That sounds like pressure, sir." "That's because it is pressure. You'll be representing your country, your gender, and your service. No small task." He stood, placing a hand on her shoulder. "But if anyone can handle it, it's you. Besides, Mitchell, you've been proving people wrong your whole life. What's 6 more months?" 3 weeks later, Sarah stepped off a C-130 transport onto French soil. Base Aérien 118 Mont-de-Marsan sprawled across the land's region of southwestern France, home to 3 fighter squadrons and some of the most elite pilots in Europe. The September air was warm and carried the scent of pine forests. Rafale jets lined the tarmac like predatory birds, their distinctive delta-wing silhouettes sharp against the afternoon sky. Commander Laurent Dubois, a silver-haired veteran with laugh lines and sharp eyes, greeted her with a firm handshake and flawless English. "Captain Mitchell, welcome to France. We've heard impressive things about your flying." His smile was genuine, warm. I hope you're ready to fall in love. The Rafale is not just an aircraft, she is poetry in motion. I'm ready to learn, Commander. Good, because we have much to teach you, and you, I suspect, have much to teach us. The first week was everything Sarah had dreamed of. French pilots treated her with professional respect, curious about American tactics and eager to share their own expertise. She flew her first Rafale sortie on day 4, a familiarization flight that left her breathless and grinning like a child. The aircraft responded to her touch like a living thing, powerful and graceful in ways that made her F-16 seem clunky by comparison. She likes you, Commander Dubois observed as Sarah climbed down from the cockpit, her legs shaky from adrenaline. The Rafale, she is temperamental, but you have the touch. Sarah couldn't stop smiling. Commander, that was the most incredible flying experience of my life. Wait until you see what she can really do. The trouble arrived on a Thursday. A diplomatic delegation from the Republic of Volhynia, a former Soviet state maintaining close ties with Russia, arrived for a joint NATO observation exercise. Sarah learned they were known for traditional military values, rigid hierarchies, and an open disdain for what they called Western social experiments in armed forces. Their leader was General Konstantin Volkov. Sarah first saw him across the base common area, a mountain of a man, 6'4", built like a Soviet-era tank, with cold gray eyes and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite with a dull chisel. His uniform dripped with medals and ribbons from conflicts most Westerners had forgotten. He carried himself with the absolute certainty of someone who'd never been told no in his entire military career. He noticed her too. His gaze swept over her flight suit, lingering on her captain's bars and pilot's wings, and something like disgust flickered across his features. Sarah felt the temperature drop 10 degrees. That evening, the base hosted a formal diplomatic dinner, a tedious affair of speeches, toasts, and carefully choreographed pleasantries designed to maintain NATO cohesion. Sarah attended in her dress blues, hair pulled back in regulation style, mentally counting the minutes until she could escape back to her quarters and study flight manuals. She was seated at a table with junior officers from various nations, trying to be invisible, when General Volkov's voice boomed across the ornate dining hall. "Commander Dubois," he called out in heavily accented French, standing with a wine glass raised, "I must commend you on your, how do you say, progressive attitudes here." His tone made progressive sound like a disease. The room quieted. Commander Dubois smiled politely, but Sarah saw tension in his shoulders. "We pride ourselves on excellence, General, regardless of where it comes from." Volkov's smile was wolf-like. "Excellence, yes, but tell me," his eyes found Sarah across the room, "is it truly excellence when standards must be lowered to accommodate political fashion, when secretaries are given pilot uniforms to wear like costumes?" The room went deathly silent. Sarah felt every eye turned toward her. Her face burned, but she kept her expression neutral, hands steady on her water glass. Years of academy training, of dismissive instructors and condescending peers, had taught her how to absorb insults without flinching. A younger French pilot at her table started to rise, indignant, but Sarah touched his arm gently. "It's fine," she murmured. It wasn't fine, but she knew better than to take Volkov's bait in front of international delegates. Commander Dubois' face had turned to stone. "General Volkov, Captain Mitchell is a decorated combat pilot with multiple commendations for." "I'm sure she has many participation trophies," Volkov interrupted, drawing chuckles from his delegation. "But we all know the Americans have lowered their standards. In my military, we maintain discipline. We maintain tradition. We do not play pretend to satisfy political correctness." Sarah set down her glass very carefully. The rational part of her brain screamed to stay silent, to let it go, to be diplomatic. The part of her that had climbed that rope at the academy 3 times in a row had other ideas. She stood slowly, and the room's attention shifted entirely to her. At 5'6", she was dwarfed by almost everyone present, but something in her bearing made her seem much larger. General Volkov. Her voice was calm, clear, carrying across the hall without her needing to shout. I appreciate your traditional perspective. I understand that change can be uncomfortable, especially for those set in their ways. Volkov's eyes narrowed dangerously. Sarah continued, her words precise as laser-guided munitions. I've logged 2,000 hours in fighter aircraft, 73 combat missions, 3 distinguished flying crosses. I can recite the technical specifications of 17 different aircraft from memory. I've outflown, outmaneuvered, and outperformed dozens of pilots who thought exactly like you do. She paused, letting the silence stretch. So here's what I propose, General. You choose any test, any challenge, any measurement of skill you consider legitimate. If I fail, I'll resign my commission immediately. I'll take off this uniform you find so offensive, and I'll never fly military aircraft again. The room erupted in whispers. Commander Dubois looked stricken. Several French officers were shaking their heads urgently. But Sarah wasn't finished. However, when I pass your test, you will publicly apologize. Not to me personally, though that would be nice, but to every female pilot, soldier, and service member who's ever had to listen to men like you question whether they belong in uniform. General Volkov's face had turned an alarming shade of purple. He stood, his massive frame towering even from across the room. You have spirit, little girl, foolish spirit, but spirit nonetheless. His smile was predatory. Very well, I accept your proposal, and I promise you the test I choose will break you. Then choose it, Sarah said simply. I'll be ready. As she sat back down, her hands beginning to tremble from adrenaline, Commander Dubois leaned close and whispered urgently, Captain Mitchell, do you have any idea what you've just done? Sarah thought of a 7-year-old girl watching jets tear across a Montana sky. She thought of her grandmother Rose building bombers when the world said women couldn't. She thought of every obstacle, every dismissal, every person who told her to give up. Yes, Commander, she whispered back. I just drew a line in the sand. Now I have to make sure I'm standing on the right side of it when this is over. Across the room, General Volkov was already conferring with his officers, planning something that would surely be designed to humiliate her. Sarah didn't care. She'd spent her entire life preparing for moments like this. Let him bring his worst. She'd been flying through storms since she was 7 years old. The announcement came at 600 hours the next morning. Sarah had barely slept, lying awake in her quarters replaying the dinner confrontation in her mind, wondering if she'd made a catastrophic mistake. When the summons arrived, Captain Mitchell, report to conference room immediately. She knew the hammer was about to fall. The room was packed. Commander Dubois sat at the head of the table, his expression grave. General Volkov dominated the opposite end, flanked by his stone-faced officers. French pilots lined the walls, along with representatives from 4 other NATO nations. Whatever was about to happen, it would have witnesses. Lots of witnesses. Captain Mitchell, Commander Dubois began, his voice tight, General Volkov has chosen his challenge. Volkov leaned forward, his massive hands folded on the table, a predator savoring the kill. Tell me, Captain, have you heard of Operation Gauntlet? Sarah's blood turned to ice. She had heard of it. Every fighter pilot had heard of it, whispered about in ready rooms like a ghost story, a legend used to separate the elite from the merely excellent. Yes, sir, I've heard of it. Good, then you know what you've agreed to. Volkov's smile was cruel. For those unfamiliar, allow me to explain. He stood, activating a wall-mounted display that showed a tactical map covered in threat indicators, each one a different way to die. Operation Gauntlet is a single-pilot air superiority exercise designed by NATO's most sadistic tactical instructors. The pilot faces eight simulated enemy aircraft simultaneously, all flown by AI programmed to use real-world enemy tactics. Additionally, there are 12 surface-to-air missile sites, electronic warfare jamming across multiple frequencies, and a time-critical strike objective that must be completed within mission parameters. A French pilot near the back whispered to his colleague, "Say impossible." Volkov heard it. Precisely. It is impossible. That is the point. Of the 47 pilots who have attempted Operation Gauntlet over the past decade, only 3 have passed, none on their first attempt. The average pilot requires 4 to 6 tries, assuming they don't wash out entirely. He turned to Sarah, eyes glittering. "But you won't get multiple attempts, Captain Mitchell. You get one. 72 hours from now, you will fly this mission solo. Pass, and I will offer my apology as promised. Fail," he paused for effect, "and you will resign your commission as you so boldly offered last night." "And by fail," interjected a Volhynian colonel with a scar across his jaw, "we mean anything less than a 75% mission success rate. Destroyed by enemy aircraft. Failure. Miss your strike objective. Failure. Exceed your time parameters. Failure." Sarah felt the room's eyes boring into her. 75%. The 3 pilots who'd passed had scored 76%, 78%, and 81%, all on their 4th, 5th, and 6th attempts respectively, after months of preparation. She had 72 hours. Commander Dubois cleared his throat. "General Volkov, this is highly irregular. Captain Mitchell is a guest pilot in a training exchange, not—" "She made the challenge," Volkov interrupted smoothly. "I am merely accepting the terms she herself proposed. Any test, any challenge, her exact words. Unless the captain wishes to withdraw." He looked at Sarah with mock concern. "There is no shame in recognizing one's limitations, young lady. You could simply apologize, admit you spoke rashly, and we can forget this unfortunate incident." Every fiber of Sarah's being screamed at her to tell Volkov exactly where he could shove his condescension. But she forced her voice to remain steady, professional. "I'm not withdrawing, General. 72 hours, Operation Gauntlet. I'll be ready." "We shall see." Volkov gathered his papers with theatrical slowness. "I must say, I almost admire your courage. Foolish, suicidal courage, but courage nonetheless. Perhaps they will name a memorial bench after you when this is over." His delegation laughed as they filed out. The moment the door closed behind them, the room erupted. "Sarah, this is insane," exclaimed Captain Jean-Paul Mercier, one of the French pilots she'd befriended. "Operation Gauntlet breaks experienced pilots. You've been flying the Rafale for 1 week." "He set you up," added another pilot, a German named Klaus. "This isn't a test, it's a public execution." Commander Dubois raised his hand for silence. When the room quieted, he looked at Sarah with an expression that mixed concern, frustration, and something that might have been respect. "Captain Mitchell, I can speak to NATO command. This challenge is inappropriate, designed to fail. No one would fault you for refusing under these circumstances." Sarah shook her head. "With respect, Commander, yes they would. If I back out now, I prove everything Volkov believes about women in combat roles. I prove we can't handle pressure, that we're all talk when things get difficult." Her voice hardened. "I didn't come this far to give men like him the satisfaction of watching me quit." "Then you understand," Dubois said quietly, "that you are almost certainly going to fail, and when you do, your career is over. You will have to resign your commission. That was your promise." "I understand, sir." "And you're willing to throw away everything you've worked for, your career, your reputation, your future, on a test deliberately designed to be impossible." Sarah met his gaze without flinching. "Sir, I've been taking impossible tests my whole life. This is just another one." Dubois studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Very well. Then we have 72 hours to prepare you for the fight of your life." He turned to the assembled pilots. "Gentlemen, clear your schedules. Captain Mitchell is going to need every advantage we can give her." The next 3 days blurred into an exhausting marathon of preparation that pushed Sarah beyond anything she'd experienced, even at the academy. Hour 1. Sarah was in the simulator flying Operation Gauntlet for the first time. She lasted 11 minutes before a simulated SAM blew her out of the sky. Score: 23%. Hour 4, second attempt, 13 minutes. A bandit caught her in a scissors maneuver she couldn't escape. Score: 31%. Hour 8, Commander Dubois brought in coffee and found her running her 7th simulation, eyes bloodshot, hands cramping on the controls. She crashed on takeoff, overcorrected from exhaustion. "You need rest," he said. "No," she replied. "I need practice." Hour 15, she scored 42%, progress but nowhere near passing. Hour 23, Captain Mercier relieved her by physically pulling her from the simulator. "Sarah, you're making mistakes because you're exhausted. Sleep for 4 hours. That's an order from a friend." She slept for 3, dreaming of radar screens and missile warnings. Hour 30, back in the simulator. New strategy: instead of trying to engage all 8 bandits, she focused on evasion and objective completion. Score: 54%. Better but still failing. Hour 45. A small crowd had gathered to watch her practice runs. Word had spread across the base about the American captain taking on Operation Gauntlet. Some watched with sympathy, others with morbid curiosity, waiting for the inevitable failure. Hour 51. Sarah scored 61%. She punched the simulator console in frustration, splitting her knuckle. Blood dripped onto the controls. She wrapped it in her flight scarf and ran the simulation again. Hour 60. Commander Dubois found her at 300, still in the simulator, surrounded by empty energy drink cans and technical manuals covered in frantic notes. He sat beside her in the observation seat. "You know," he said quietly, "there is something you should understand about Operation Gauntlet. It is not just a test of skill. It is a test of innovation. The 3 pilots who passed, they did not simply fly better. They flew differently. They found angles, approaches, tactics that the simulation designers had not anticipated." Sarah turned to him, exhaustion making her eyes hollow. "What are you saying, Commander?" "I am saying that you cannot beat Volkov by playing his game by his rules. You must play your own game. Show him something he has never seen before." He stood to leave, then paused. "And Sarah, that fire in your eyes that made you challenge him in the first place, you are going to need every bit of it." Hour 70. Sarah sat alone in the chapel, a small stone building at the edge of the base, quiet and cool in the pre-dawn darkness. She wasn't particularly religious, but she needed somewhere to think, to center herself before the storm. She pulled out her grandmother Rose's dog tags, rubbing her thumb over the worn metal. "I could really use some of your strength right now, Grandma," she whispered to the empty room. "Everyone thinks I'm going to fail. Maybe they're right. Maybe I bit off more than I can chew this time." The dog tags caught the candlelight, and Sarah remembered something her father had told her about Rose. During the war, when the factory supervisors said women couldn't handle certain jobs, Rose hadn't argued. She'd simply done the work so well they had no choice but to admit they were wrong. Sarah smiled grimly. "Okay, I get it, let's talk more action." Hour 72. Dawn broke over base Agrian 118, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Sarah stood in the ready room, pulling on her flight suit with steady hands. Her last practice run had scored 68%, still failing but closer. She'd run Operation Gauntlet 43 times in 3 days. She'd learned every enemy pattern, every SAM placement, every electronic warfare frequency. But she'd also learned something else. The simulation had weaknesses, patterns in the AI behavior, timing windows, angles of approach that confused the tracking systems. Commander Dubois had been right. She couldn't win by being better at their game. She had to change the game entirely. Captain Mitchell, a young airman, appeared at the door. "They're ready for you. The entire base is gathering to watch." Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her grandmother's dog tags against her chest. "Tell them I'm on my way," she said, "and tell General Volkov I hope he's prepared to apologize." As she walked toward her Rafale, Sarah Mitchell wasn't thinking about failure. She was thinking about flight, and how she was about to show them all what impossible really looked like. The runway was lined with people. Sarah had expected observers, maybe a dozen officials, some senior officers, the required safety personnel. What she hadn't expected was this: over 500 personnel crowding every available space along the taxiway. French pilots, ground crew, administrative staff, even kitchen workers had abandoned their posts to witness what everyone was calling either the greatest upset or the greatest humiliation in base history. The morning air was crisp, carrying the smell of jet fuel and dew-soaked grass. Sarah's Rafale sat waiting on the tarmac, sleek and deadly, its delta wings gleaming in the early light. Somewhere in the control tower, computers were already generating the 8 enemy aircraft that would try to kill her, the SAM sites that would track her every move, the electronic warfare systems designed to blind and confuse her. General Volkov stood near the observation platform, surrounded by his delegation, arms crossed over his barrel chest. Even from a distance, Sarah could see his confident smirk. He'd already won as far as he was concerned. This was just the formality of watching her fail. Commander Dubois walked beside Sarah toward the aircraft, carrying her helmet, his face etched with worry. "You don't have to do this," he said one final time. "I spoke with NATO Command last night. They're prepared to call this off, cite it as a violation of training protocols." "Commander," Sarah stopped, turning to face him. "Thank you, truly. But if I don't do this, every woman who comes after me will face the same doubts, the same challenges, the same men like Volkov who think we're just playing dress-up in uniform. This isn't just about me anymore." Dubois studied her face, then slowly nodded. "Then fly like you've never flown before, and remember, sometimes the only way to win an impossible game is to break the rules." He handed her the helmet. "Bonne chance, mon ami." Sarah took the helmet, its weight familiar and comforting in her hands. Inside, she'd taped a small photograph, her grandmother Rose standing in front of that B-17 bomber, hand on its fuselage, defiant smile bright. As she walked the final 50 feet to her aircraft, the crowd fell silent. Every eye tracked her movement. She heard whispered conversations in French, German, English. "She's smaller than I expected. This is cruel. Volkov knows she can't win. I heard she only scored 68% in practice. Needs 75 to pass. Poor girl, she has no idea what she's walking into." Sarah blocked it all out. She'd learned long ago that other people's expectations were just noise, static on a frequency she didn't need to monitor. Her crew chief, a grizzled French sergeant named Pierre, waited by the ladder. He'd prepped her aircraft personally, spending the night running diagnostics, checking every system twice. When Sarah reached him, he snapped to attention. "Captain Mitchell, your aircraft is ready, all systems optimal." He paused, his weathered face softening. "For what it's worth, I think you're very brave. My daughter, she's 14. She watches you Americans, the women pilots, and she tells me she wants to fly too. Whatever happens today, you've already inspired more people than you know." Sarah felt her throat tighten. "Thank you, Pierre, that means everything." She climbed the ladder, each rung bringing her closer to the cockpit, closer to the test that would define her career. At the top, she paused, looking out over the assembled crowd. Somewhere in that sea of faces, she knew there were people rooting for her, but she also knew many expected, even wanted to see her fail to prove that women didn't belong in fighter jets. General Volkov caught her eye and raised his hand in a mocking salute. Sarah didn't respond. She simply lowered herself into the cockpit. The Rafale's cockpit wrapped around her like a second skin. Sarah ran through her pre-flight checklist with practiced precision, her hands moving across switches and displays while her mind entered that focused state where everything unnecessary fell away. This was her church, her meditation, her art form. The radio crackled to life. Falcon 1, this is Tower. You are cleared for Operation Gauntlet. Mission parameters are loaded. Once you begin your takeoff roll, the simulation activates. 8 hostile aircraft, 12 SAM sites, electronic warfare active across all frequencies. Your strike objective is the command bunker at coordinates November 7-3. Time limit, 18 minutes from wheels up. Required success rate, 75%. Do you copy? Tower Falcon 1 copies all. Ready for takeoff. Falcon 1, one more thing. It was Commander Dubois' voice now speaking from the tower. Remember, they designed this to be survived, not perfected. Focus on what matters. And Sarah, we're all with you. Sarah smiled inside her oxygen mask. Acknowledged Tower, Falcon 1 rolling. She advanced the throttles. The Rafale's twin M88 engines spooled up, their distinctive whine building to a roar. The aircraft trembled with barely contained power, eager to fly. Sarah released the brakes. The Rafale leaped forward. G-forces pressed her back into the seat as the aircraft accelerated down the runway, 60 knots, 80, 100. The crowd blurred past her peripheral vision. At 140 knots, she rotated, pulling the stick back smoothly. The wheels left the ground. And everything changed. Falcon 1, you have 8 bandits inbound. Threat display active. Sarah's radar screen exploded with contacts. 8 red diamonds, converging from multiple vectors, already moving to engage. Her threat warning receiver screamed. 12 SAM sites had locked onto her simultaneously. 18 minutes to complete her objective. 8 enemy aircraft to evade or destroy. 12 SAM sites trying to blow her from the sky. Game on, Sarah muttered. The first bandit came at her head-on, a classic aggressive opening designed to rattle inexperienced pilots. Sarah had seen it 43 times in the simulator. She knew this AI's playbook. But the AI didn't know hers. Instead of turning defensive, Sarah punched her afterburners and climbed, nearly vertical, G-forces crushing her chest, vision tunneling as blood drained from her brain. The enemy aircraft tried to follow but couldn't match the Rafale's thrust-to-weight ratio. Sarah barrel rolled at the top of her climb, inverting, and came down behind her attacker. Fox 2, she called, simulating a missile shot. The bandit disappeared from her screen. 7 left. But 3 more were already on her tail, and her threat warning was painting her with multiple SAM locks. She dove hard, pulling 7 GS, her anti-G suit inflating to keep her conscious. The landscape rushed up, trees, a river, the simulation's digital terrain mapping reality perfectly. At 500 feet, Sarah leveled off, terrain masking her from some of the SAM sites. She threaded between 2 hills, the Rafale's wingtips clearing the terrain by meters. Behind her, one pursuing bandit pulled up, unwilling to follow her into the weeds. 2 stayed with her, aggressive AI, learning AI. Sarah's mind raced. In the simulator, she tried to fight them all to prove she was the better dogfighter. She'd failed every time, but Commander Dubois' words echoed, find a different angle. What if she didn't fight them at all? Sarah checked her strike objective coordinates, 6 miles northeast. She had 14 minutes left. Instead of engaging her pursuers, she poured on speed, the Rafale's engines screaming as she went supersonic at low altitude. The shock wave rattled windows on the base below. She's running, someone exclaimed in the observation tower. General Volkov laughed. As expected, she realizes she's outmatched. But Commander Dubois watched the tactical display with narrowed eyes. No, she's not running, she's thinking. Sarah rocketed across the simulation landscape, her two pursuers matching her speed, waiting for an opening. Her radar showed the other 5 bandits repositioning, trying to cut her off. The AI was coordinating, working as a team. Good, that meant they were predictable. At 4 miles from the objective, Sarah did something the simulation designers never anticipated. She killed her engines. The Rafale, traveling at 750 knots, suddenly became a gliding missile. Her pursuers overshot, their closure rate too fast to compensate. In the 3 seconds of confusion, Sarah relit her engines, pulled a crushing 9G turn, and came around behind both aircraft. Fox 2, 2 more bandits eliminated. 5 left, 11 minutes remaining. The observation tower erupted in shocked exclamations. No one had ever seen that maneuver in Operation Gauntlet. Sarah didn't have time to celebrate. 3 SAM sites had clear shots at her now, missiles already in the air. Her threat warning was a continuous scream. She released chaff and flares, the countermeasures blooming behind her like deadly fireworks, and dove into a canyon system she'd memorized from her practice runs. The missiles, confused by the electronic countermeasures and the terrain, detonated harmlessly. 2 miles from the objective, 8 minutes left, 5 bandits still hunting. Sarah climbed out of the canyon and immediately faced all 5 enemy aircraft, perfectly positioned, waiting for her. The simulation's final trap. In the tower, Volkov smiled. Now she's finished, 5 against 1, no escape. But Sarah wasn't looking for escape. She was looking for victory. And she just thought of something crazy enough to work. Tower Falcon 1. Question: does Operation Gauntlet have rules about using enemy aircraft against each other? Confused silence. Then, negative Falcon 1, no such rule exists. Sarah's smile was fierce inside her mask. Copy that, Falcon 1 engaging. She dove straight at the center of the enemy formation. Every pilot in the observation tower gasped. And General Volkov's smile finally began to fade. Sarah dove straight into the heart of the enemy formation at 600 knots, and for 3 seconds, every person watching thought she'd lost her mind. The 5 bandits had positioned themselves in a perfect intercept pattern, a textbook defensive formation designed to give overlapping fields of fire with no escape routes. Standard doctrine said to evade, reposition, find an angle. Standard doctrine meant certain death. Sarah Mitchell had stopped following standard doctrine the moment she challenged Volkov. At the last possible instant, she pulled into a vertical climb so violent that her G-suit inflated like a blood pressure cuff from hell. 9GS crushed her into her seat, her vision graying at the edges, every muscle in her body straining against the force trying to render her unconscious. The Rafale screamed upward like a rocket, afterburners painting the sky with twin columns of fire. The enemy AI reacted exactly as she'd predicted. All 5 aircraft pulled up to follow, their targeting systems locked on her, preparing for an easy kill once her energy bled off at the top of the climb. They were thinking like machines. Sarah was thinking like a survivor. At 15,000 feet, she cut her engines and deliberately stalled. The Rafale hung motionless for 1 perfect heartbeat, balanced on its thrust vectoring like a hummingbird, and then Sarah kicked full left rudder. The aircraft fell. Not a controlled descent, a flat spin tumbling toward Earth, completely outside the normal flight envelope. In the tower, someone screamed. This was how pilots died. This was how aircraft became smoking craters. But Sarah had practiced this 43 times. The 5 enemy aircraft, programmed for thousands of combat scenarios but not for suicide, broke formation in confusion. Their targeting solutions evaporated. For 3 critical seconds, they were reactive instead of proactive. Sarah counted to 2, then slammed the stick forward and right, lit the engines, and pulled out of the spin at 8,000 feet, now behind and below the scattered formation. Fox 2, Fox 2. 3 more bandits disappeared from her screen. 2 enemies left, 5 minutes remaining, 1 mile from the objective. In the observation tower, Commander Dubois stood with his mouth open. Mon Dieu, that's not possible, that maneuver should have. Killed her, finished Captain Mercier, his voice awed. That should have killed her. General Volkov's face had gone from smug to uncertain to something approaching alarm. What is her current score? He demanded. The technician checked his display. Current mission success rate, 63%, General. She's eliminated 6 of 8 bandits, evaded all SAM shots, but she still needs to complete the strike objective and... A SAM launch indicator flashed on Sarah's threat display. 2 missiles, fired from different sites, converging on her position with the mathematical precision of inevitable death. 4 minutes left. Sarah yanked the Rafale into a diving corkscrew, dropping chaff and flares while her radar warning receiver screamed. 1 missile took the bait and detonated behind her. The second kept coming, its seeker head locked on her engine heat signature, closing at Mach 3. 3 minutes. She couldn't outrun it, couldn't outturn it. The missile was too close, too fast, its kill probability approaching 98%. So Sarah stopped trying to escape and flew straight at a mountain. She's going to crash, someone shouted in the tower. The Rafale arrowed toward the rock face at 700 knots, the missile 20 seconds behind, the mountain filling her entire canopy. Sarah's hands were steady on the stick. Her breathing was calm. She'd seen this moment in her mind 100 times. At the last possible instant, so late that the tower crew actually closed their eyes, Sarah pulled up and right, the Rafale's belly clearing the mountain peak by less than 10 feet. The missile, locked onto her heat signature and programmed for maximum kill probability, couldn't adjust in time. It impacted the mountainside in a simulated fireball that would have been spectacular if it were real. 2 minutes remaining. Sarah cleared the mountain range and saw her objective. The command bunker, a reinforced structure in a valley, defended by the 2 remaining enemy aircraft circling like sharks. Her weapons display showed she had 1 simulated guided bomb remaining. 1 shot, 2 minutes, 2 enemies. Normal tactics: evade the enemies, establish a stable attack run, deliver the weapon. Time required, approximately 4 minutes. Time available, 120 seconds. Sarah armed her weapon and went to Afterburner. Falcon 1, you have 2 bandits closing on your 6 o'clock, the tower warned urgently. I see them, Sarah replied, her voice eerily calm. She screamed toward the objective in a shallow dive, the 2 enemy aircraft pursuing, their targeting systems achieving lock. In 10 seconds they would fire. She would die. Mission failed. Sarah's thumb hovered over the weapon release. 7 seconds. The bunker grew larger in her targeting display. 5 seconds. Enemy missile launch warning. Sarah pickled off her bomb, pulled into a 9G turn that made her ribs creak, and dove into a narrow ravine barely wider than her wingspan. The enemy missiles, committed to their intercept course, flew over the ravine. 1 detonated against the far wall, the other lost lock and self-destructed. Behind her, Sarah's guided bomb fell in a perfect ballistic arc and struck the command bunker dead center. 1 minute remaining. Sarah rocketed out of the ravine, bleeding airspeed, her last 2 pursuers converging for the kill. She had no weapons left, no tricks remaining, no energy to maneuver. 45 seconds. In a pure dogfight against 2 fresh opponents, she was dead. So Sarah did the only thing left: she ran. Full throttle, military power, racing back toward base while the 2 bandits closed from behind, their firing solutions perfecting with every second. 30 seconds. Sarah crossed the boundary of the base airspace. The bandits followed and immediately broke off pursuit. The simulation's rules: Enemy aircraft don't violate friendly airspace during training exercises. Sarah had just weaponized the simulation's own safety protocols against itself. 15 seconds. She rolled inverted, pulled through until she was upright, and descended toward the runway with hands that suddenly wouldn't stop shaking. 10 seconds. The Rafale's wheels touched concrete as her mission timer hit 17:58. 2 seconds under the limit. The aircraft rolled to a stop, and for a moment, Sarah just sat there in the cockpit, her flight suit soaked through with sweat, her heart hammering so hard she could hear it over the engine noise, unable to quite believe she was still alive, even in a simulation. Then the radio crackled. Falcon 1 tower, mission complete, stand by for score calculation. Sarah closed her eyes. She'd done everything possible, used every trick, every innovation, every desperate gambit. Either it was enough or it wasn't. 75%, that was the magic number. The radio silence stretched for 30 seconds that felt like 30 years. Then Commander Dubois' voice came through, barely controlled, trembling with emotion. Falcon 1 tower, final mission score 92%. I repeat, 92%. Captain Mitchell, that's the highest score in Operation Gauntlet history. For a moment, Sarah couldn't process the words. 92%, not just passing, not barely scraping by. The highest score ever recorded. The radio erupted with French voices cheering, shouting, laughing. Through her canopy, Sarah could see the crowd along the runway, hundreds of people, jumping, embracing, pointing at her aircraft in disbelief. She popped the canopy and stood up on shaking legs, pulling off her helmet, her hair plastered to her head with sweat. The roar that went up from the crowd was deafening. French pilots swarmed toward her aircraft. Ground crew abandoned their posts to sprint across the tarmac. Even hardened officers who'd initially doubted her stood with their hands over their mouths in shock. But Sarah's eyes found only one person in the crowd. General Konstantin Volkov stood exactly where he'd been before the flight, but everything about him had changed. His confident posture had collapsed. His arms hung at his sides. His face was the color of spoiled milk. The man who demanded she remove her uniform now couldn't meet her eyes. Sarah climbed down the ladder on legs that barely functioned, her boots hitting the tarmac just as Commander Dubois reached her. The weathered French pilot had tears streaming down his face. "Sarah," he said, his voice breaking, "that was the most extraordinary flying I have witnessed in 40 years of military aviation. You didn't just pass. You redefined what we thought was possible." All around her, pilots pressed close, speaking rapid French, English, German, a dozen languages united in awe. Hands patted her shoulders, her back. Someone pressed a bottle of water into her hands. But through the crowd, Sarah kept her eyes locked on General Volkov. She began walking toward him. The crowd parted like water. The general stood rigid, his delegation surrounding him, all of them looking like they'd witnessed something that violated the fundamental laws of their universe. Sarah stopped 3 feet away from Volkov. Even in her exhausted state, even dwarfed by his massive frame, she somehow seemed to tower over him. The crowd fell silent, hundreds of people holding their breath. "General Volkov," Sarah said quietly, her voice hoarse from the oxygen mask but steady as bedrock. "I believe you have something to say to me." General Konstantin Volkov had stared down enemies in 3 separate wars, survived a helicopter crash, and commanded men in situations where a single wrong decision meant death. He was a decorated veteran of conflicts most people only read about in history books, a man who'd built his reputation on strength, tradition, and absolute certainty in his convictions. But standing on that French tarmac, facing a woman half his size who just accomplished the impossible, Volkov looked like a man watching his entire worldview crumble in real time. His jaw clenched, his hands balled into fists, Pride warred with shame across his granite features, each emotion fighting for dominance. The silence stretched so long that people began shifting uncomfortably, wondering if he would refuse, if he would simply walk away and let the international incident explode. Finally his mouth opened. "You," the word came out strangled, barely audible. "You passed." Sarah took one step closer, her exhausted body somehow radiating authority. "I'm sorry, General, I don't think everyone heard you. And that wasn't the agreement. Say it properly. Say it loud enough for all these witnesses, the same witnesses you wanted here to watch me fail." Volkov's face flushed deep red. One of his colonels whispered urgently in Russian, "Sir, we should leave. This is humiliating." "Shut up," Volkov snapped at his aide, still in Russian. Sarah responded in perfect Russian. "Yes, please do shut up. The general and I are having a conversation about honor and keeping one's word." Volkov's eyes widened in shock. She spoke Russian fluently, had probably understood every condescending comment his delegation had made over the past week. The realization seemed to crack something inside him. When he spoke again, his voice was stronger, projected across the crowd. "I apologize, Captain Mitchell." "For what specifically?" Sarah's tone wasn't cruel, but it was implacable. This apology would be complete, or it would be nothing. Volkov closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them, something had shifted. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something rawer, more honest. "I apologize for disrespecting you, your service, and your capabilities as a pilot. I apologize for assuming your gender made you less qualified, less capable, less worthy of wearing a military uniform." His voice grew stronger, steadier. "You have demonstrated skill and courage that surpasses 99% of pilots I have encountered in my career. I was wrong. Completely, utterly wrong." The crowd erupted in applause, but Sarah raised her hand for silence. She wasn't finished. "General Volkov, I don't need your applause or your praise, but I need you to understand something." She paused, making sure every word would land. "I'm not exceptional because I'm a woman who can fly. I'm exceptional because I can fly. My gender is irrelevant to my abilities. And every woman in uniform, every woman who has ever been told she doesn't belong, that she's too weak, too small, too female, deserves the same respect you would give any male soldier who earned it." Volkov nodded slowly. "You are correct. And he struggled with the next words, "I have been allowing my traditions, my upbringing, my fears about change to cloud my judgment. This does not excuse my behavior, but perhaps it explains it." "Fear about change," Sarah repeated softly. "General, I understand that. Change is terrifying. But you know what's more terrifying? A military that refuses to use its best people because of what's between their legs rather than what's between their ears." For the first time, something like a genuine smile crossed Volkov's weathered face. "You have fire, Captain Mitchell. That stunt you pulled in the simulation, the deliberate stall, the controlled spin." He shook his head in disbelief. "I have never seen anything like it. Tell me honestly, where did you learn such madness?" "Desperation, General, and 43 practice runs where I failed because I was trying to play by the rules." Sarah's expression softened slightly. "You designed the test to be impossible, so I stopped trying to pass it the possible way." "Brilliant," Volkov admitted. "Insane, but brilliant. That ravine flight at the end, my pilots were calculating you had perhaps 20% chance of survival if it were real." "It was probably closer to 10%, Sarah said with a tired smile. "But 10% odds beat 0% odds when you're out of options." Commander Dubois stepped forward, his voice formal. "General Volkov, Captain Mitchell, the NATO observers have requested a full debrief of this exercise. Captain Mitchell's tactics will be analyzed and potentially incorporated into advanced pilot training across member nations. What we witnessed today was not just one pilot's victory. It was an evolution of tactical thinking." Volkov extended his massive hand toward Sarah. She looked at it for a long moment, then clasped it firmly. His hand engulfed hers, but her grip was solid, unwavering. "Captain Mitchell," Volkov said, "you have taught this old dog that perhaps it is not too late to learn new tricks. I have a granddaughter, 16 years old, always talking about joining the military. I have been discouraging her, telling her there are better paths for women." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "When I return home, I will tell her about you, and I will apologize to her as well." Something in Sarah's chest tightened at those words. "What's her name?" "Maria Volkova." "Tell Maria that the sky doesn't care about her gender. It only cares whether she has the courage to chase it." Sarah released his hand. "And General, thank you for the apology, yes, but more importantly for the challenge. You pushed me further than I've ever been pushed. You made me prove to myself more than anyone that I belong here." Volkov nodded gravely. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "that was what I needed to see as well. Not that you could fly, but that you could be pushed to your absolute limit and still rise above." The crowd, which had been silent during this exchange, erupted again. This time Sarah didn't stop them. She was too exhausted, too emotionally spent, too overwhelmed by what had just happened. Captain Mercier appeared at her side with a chair. "Sarah, sit before you fall down. You've been flying for 18 minutes and standing for 10, and you look like death." Sarah gratefully collapsed into the chair, her legs finally giving out. The adrenaline was fatting, leaving behind bone-deep exhaustion and the beginning of what would be spectacular bruises from the G-forces she'd pulled. Commander Dubois knelt beside her. "How do you feel?" Sarah laughed, the sound slightly hysterical. "Sir, I feel like I just fought God and won on a technicality." "Close," Dubois smiled. "You fought the impossible and won with innovation. There's a difference. God would have been easier, less adaptive AI." As the crowd began to disperse, still buzzing with excitement and disbelief, General Volkov approached one final time. He stood at attention and delivered a crisp military salute, the kind reserved for superior officers and exceptional acts of valor. Sarah, still sitting because standing seemed impossible, returned the salute from her chair. "Fly safe, Captain Mitchell," Volkov said formally, "and know that you have earned the respect of even your harshest critic." "Fly safe, General," Sarah replied, "and say hello to Maria for me." As Volkov walked away, his delegation trailing behind in stunned silence, Commander Dubois leaned close to Sarah. "You know what the most beautiful part of this is?" he asked. "What's that, sir?" 20 years from now, young pilots will study your flight today in academies around the world. They will analyze your tactics, your decisions, your courage. And some of them, maybe many of them, will be young women who saw what you did and decided they belonged in the sky too. Sarah looked up at the clear blue expanse above the base, where her Rafale's contrails were slowly dissipating like white ribbons against the infinite canvas. "I hope so, Commander," she whispered. "I really hope so." Because that, in the end, was worth more than any apology. That was legacy. 20 years later, the photograph still hung on the wall. Colonel Sarah Mitchell, now 49 years old, sat in her office at Nellis Air Force Base, Nevada, the same base where she'd received that NATO invitation 2 decades ago. The photograph was faded slightly at the edges, but the image remained powerful, her Rafale streaking across a perfect French sky at supersonic speed, contrails painting white lines against impossible blue, captured by a base photographer during that famous flyby after Operation Gauntlet. She'd flown countless missions since that day, combat sorties in 3 different theaters, test pilot duties on classified programs. Eventually, a command position training the next generation of fighter pilots. Her career had been everything she dreamed of in that small Montana town, and more. But it was the letter she held in her hands that morning that brought tears to her eyes. "Dear Colonel Mitchell, my name is Maria Volkov. You probably don't remember, but you met my grandfather 20 years ago in France. He was not kind to you, but you changed his life that day, and in doing so, you changed mine. I am writing to tell you that yesterday, I completed my first solo flight in an F-35. I am now officially a fighter pilot in the United States Air Force, the first woman from my family to serve in any military, and the first from my country to fly fighters for America. My grandfather died 5 years ago, but before he passed, he told me the story of you at least 100 times. He called you the pilot who taught an old bear that the sky belongs to everyone brave enough to chase it. He kept a photograph of your Rafale on his desk until the day he died. He made me promise him something, that if I ever achieved my dream of flying, I would find you and say thank you. So, thank you, Colonel Mitchell. Thank you for showing a stubborn old general and his granddaughter that courage and skill have no gender. With deepest respect and gratitude. First Lieutenant Maria Volkov, USAF. Sarah read the letter 3 times, each reading bringing fresh tears. General Konstantin Volkov, that bear of a man who tried to humiliate her, who'd been forced to apologize, who'd somehow become an unexpected part of her legacy. The thought that he'd kept her photograph, that he'd encouraged his granddaughter to fly, that he'd changed. It meant everything. The knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. "Colonel, your 10 o'clock is here." Sarah wiped her eyes quickly, tucking Maria's letter into her desk drawer like a treasure. "Send them in." The door opened, and 5 young women entered, all cadets from the Air Force Academy, all top of their class, all selected for the Advanced Tactical Fighter program. They stood at attention, nervous energy radiating from them. "At ease," Sarah said with a smile. "Sit, please." They sat, perching on the edges of their chairs like birds ready for flight. "Do you know why you're here?" Sarah asked. The tallest cadet, a young woman with dark skin and bright eyes named Jackson, spoke first. "Ma'am, we were told you wanted to speak with us about the fighter pipeline, about what to expect." "Partially true," Sarah nodded. "But mostly I wanted to tell you that it's going to be hard, harder than you think. You'll face instructors who doubt you, fellow pilots who resent you, systems that weren't designed with you in mind. Some days you'll wonder if you made a mistake, if you should have chosen an easier path." The cadet's expressions faltered slightly. Sarah leaned forward. "And on those days, I want you to remember something. 20 years ago, I was challenged to complete an impossible test by a man who believed women had no place in fighter jets. I had 72 hours to prepare for something that breaks most pilots. The odds were designed to destroy me." "Operation Gauntlet," whispered one cadet, eyes wide. "We studied your flight in tactical class. You scored 92%. "I scored 92%, Sarah confirmed, "because I stopped trying to play their game by their rules. I made my own game. And that's what I need you to understand. The barriers you'll face are real, but they're not insurmountable. They're just obstacles that require creative solutions." Another cadet, a petite woman named Chen, raised her hand hesitantly. "Colonel Mitchell, do you ever regret it? The challenge, the pressure, all of it." Sarah thought about her grandmother Rose, about her father's hardware store, about cold nights on a Montana rooftop plotting courses through stars. She thought about General Volkov's apology, about Maria Volkov earning her wings, about every letter she'd received over 20 years from young women who'd seen her story and decided to fly. "Not for a single second," she said firmly, "because every difficulty I faced, every obstacle I overcame made the path easier for you, for your daughters, for every woman who comes after. That's not a burden, it's an honor." She stood, walking to the photograph of her Rafale. "This picture represents the hardest 18 minutes of my life, but it also represents the moment I proved, to myself, more than anyone, that I belonged in the sky. Each of you will have your own 18 minutes, your own impossible test. And when that moment comes, I need you to remember, you're not just flying for yourself. You're flying for everyone who was told they couldn't." The cadets stood as well, their uncertainty replaced with something fiercer, brighter. "Now get out of my office," Sarah said with a grin. You have flights to catch, dreams to chase, and barriers to break. Dismissed. That evening, Sarah returned to her quarters and found another letter waiting, this one from an elementary school in Montana. She opened it carefully. Dear Colonel Mitchell, my name is Emma Rodriguez and I'm 12 years old. I live in Whitewood, Montana. My teacher showed us a video about your Operation Gauntlet flight and said you grew up here. I told her I want to be a pilot too, but she said I should think about something more realistic because flying is really hard and dangerous. I know it's hard, but is it okay if I try anyway? You're my hero. Emma. Sarah sat down at her desk, pulled out her personal stationery, and began to write. Dear Emma, when I was 7 years old, I stood on a cracked sidewalk in Whitewood and watched F-16s tear across a Montana sky. Everyone told me to be realistic. They said girls like us should dream smaller, safer, easier. I'm writing this letter from Nellie's Air Force Base, where I command a fighter training squadron. I've flown combat missions, tested experimental aircraft, and yes, I completed Operation Gauntlet with the highest score in its history. So here's my answer. It's not just okay if you try. It's essential that you try. The sky is waiting for you, Emma, and it doesn't care what anyone else thinks is realistic. Enclosed is a model Rafale, the aircraft I flew that day. Build it, study it, dream about it, and when you're old enough, come find me. I'll personally make sure you get your chance to fly. The sky belongs to everyone brave enough to chase it. Never stop reaching. Colonel Sarah Mitchell. P.S. Say hello to Whitewood for me. Tell that town that the girl they thought was a dreamer is now teaching others how to dream bigger. Sarah sealed the envelope, attached the model Rafale she'd purchased that afternoon, and addressed it to Emma Rodriguez, Whitewood Elementary School, Montana. Then she walked outside into the Nevada night, where stars blazed overhead in patterns she'd memorized as a child, and F-16s cut across the darkness in training runs, their engines writing poetry across the sky. Somewhere out there, young women were dreaming of flight. Somewhere, barriers were crumbling. Somewhere, a 12-year-old girl would open a package and decide her future. And Sarah Mitchell, who'd started as a simple girl from a small town, who'd been told to take off her uniform, who'd shown up flying a Rafale over their camp, smiled at the infinite sky and whispered the same words her grandmother Rose had told her father decades ago. Don't let anyone clip your wings before you've learned to fly. Then she went inside to plan tomorrow's training sorties. There were more pilots to train, more barriers to break, more impossible things to make possible. The work was never finished. But God, what beautiful work it was. The end.